So like I was saying, I had to cut that one short because they were making noise around me. Sorry about that. So I'm set up somewhere else. I don't know if this fan is going to be disturbing. Is the fan disturbing? There's a fan beside me.
It's okay now. It's okay.
Okay. All right. Yes. So okay. Yeah. So like I was saying, the startup is there to set up the configurations. There are a lot of configurations that you could set up, dependencies and all of that, right? So that's where we're going to now set up the configuration for our database finally. So inside of this configure services, we're going to set up our services where we're going to register the DB context. So that's services.add DB context. Then we're going to name the DB context, which is app DB context. We'll bring in a using statement. Then inside of here, we're going to register some options, right? So we'll say options that goes to options dot use SQL Server, right? Then configuration dot get connection string. Our connection string is default. Yeah, so that should be the name of the connection string. So it's complaining because we need a using statement also for this, Microsoft.entity-framework. At this point, we've already done all of the configurations that we need. We've created our DB sets, we've created our connection string, and then we've also registered in our startup, right? So now we've done all of the configurations that we need to create our database, right? So what we need to do, we need to create something called a migrations file. A migrations file that will be created automatically for us when we type in this command. This is the command, .NET EF migrations add. Then we'll give it a name, right? So this is our first migration. So I'm just going to call it initial migration, right? So when we type this command, it's going to create our migrations file from our DB context, right? If I press enter, what this thing does is going to look for the DB context and then use this DB context to create a migration file. And you're going to see what the migration file would look like shortly. So it's building the project, then succeeded, and then the migration file will be created soon. All right, done. So it says done. Let me see, migrations, right? So this folder wasn't here previously, but it just got created now. So if you notice, the name of our migration, which is initial migration, is what it used. I spelled initial wrong anyways. It's what it used to create this file, right? So when I click on this file, I'm going to zoom out and drop this. If you notice, this file has two methods. Up, I close this up, and down, right? Those are the two methods that are inside of this file, right? The up method has a function that says create table. What's the table that it's going to create? It's going to create a user data table, like I mentioned earlier on, right? And then inside of that table, it's going to have a couple of columns. ID, which is an integer column, and then it's the identity of each of the column, and it's going to start from 1, and it's not nullable. Not nullable means that it cannot be null. So you cannot have a table where the ID is null, right? First name is string, the type is this, and it's also nullable, null, last name, everything up to email, everything have been done. So now the constraint is our primary key would be the x.id, right? So that this ID will be our primary key. All of this was done automatically for us by Entity Framework. All of this was done automatically for us by Entity Framework. Now, what is the down? The down is, if I call this method, this down method is going to drop the user table, right? So what if we did a migration, the migration was a mistake, we can eventually drop that table, right? So that is what this down is for. So you can drop that last operation, right? So for now, the last operation is creating of the table, right? So if the last operation was probably adding a column, right? So the down will probably say drop that column like that. And that is what happens. Then the design was also, specified here, as you can see. And then snapshots and all of this. All of this were all done by Entity Framework Core. Right? So the next thing we need to do is to now create our database, right? We've already done everything. We need to create our database. Right now, that data, let me connect here. That database called Wela School DB. I think that's what it's called. Let me see. Let me confirm. Wela School DB is not in our database, right? So just bring this up here. If I check our database, there's nothing called Wela School DB. There's just Wela Health database and Wela Health Rewards database, right? There's nothing called Wela School DB. So, but now we want to create that database from our code. That's where our last command comes in. So the previous command was .NET EF migrations add and then the title of the migration. But this command to update the database is called .NET EF database updates. So when we type this command, it's going to now go through our migrations file, this migrations file, and it's going to carry out the operation in the up part of the file, right? So that's what it's going to do. It's going to carry out the operation in the up part of the file. And then, in this case, the operation is creating a database table with all of these columns. So if I come back here, it's not reflecting now, even though it has successfully done, it says done, right? It's not reflecting. But if I reload this and come back here, Wela School DB has already been created. And what do we have inside Wela School DB? We have a table called user data table. And what do we have inside user data table? If I check the design, we're going to see the ID, which is the primary key, and that's why that key option is there. We're also going to see the first name, the last name, location, phone number, and email. So all of this is in the database right now. But right now the database is empty because if I try to edit the first 200 rows, there's not going to be anything inside of it. Just no. So it's empty right now. So what do we want to be able to add to the database? We already have a form in the front end. Oh, it's frozen. Let me stop sharing and reshare. Let me know when you can see it. Let me know when you can see it.
We can see it.
Okay. So I don't know when last you saw it, but okay, I'm going to show this part. So I just checked the first 200 columns of the database table, but there's nothing there. It says no. So we want to now start passing information into our database, right? So to do that, we already have a form from our last class, and then we're using that form to pass information, and then we're storing it into this list, right? But we do not want to use this, we want to use an actual database now. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to remove this and then create a constructor, right? We're going to use something called dependency injection. Dependency injection. Let me just type that in. The dependency injection, right? So with dependency injection, you can inject a class into another class and then use that class however much you want to use it without having to new up that class. New up is what I said, without having to new up that class. Now, if we want to use application DB context in this method right now, what we normally need to do is application DB context equals new, right? Now, if I want to use it in this other class or in this other method, I'll do it again. I have to do application DB context equals new, right? So everywhere I want to use it, I need to new it up, right? So if I don't want to do that, I would use something called dependency injection to inject that class into the new class, the other class I want to use it. Then I would now use that injected class in my new class, right? So the injected class in this case would be application DB context. The class we're going to be using it inside is our user controller. So now let me inject application DB context inside this class. Application DB context, right? So I'm passing it inside, not application DB context, it's supposed to be app DB context, right? So I'm passing it inside I'm passing it as an argument into the constructor of our user controller class, right? Now, what I need to do is I need to also create a private read-only field called app DB context, and I'm going to call it underscore context, right? Now here, I'm going to say underscore context equals context. So what this is saying is, once we call this user controller, the first method that is called is user controller method, which is the constructor. Now, inside this constructor, I'm passing in our app DB context, right? And then once I pass it into the constructor and it's called, I'm going to be storing it inside this field, this private read-only field. So now I can now use this private read-only field anywhere in my class without having to do app DB context equals new app DB context every time, right? And that is what dependency injection is, right? So to use this to get everything in our database, all I need to do is var user equals context dot user data table dot to list. Then I can now return user to the view, right? Now let me explain this. Context is our application DB context. User table is the DB set that is inside of it. This user table is the DB set. So if I have another table, in the database, like let's say I have another table called user age table, and I have another table called user properties table or whatever, and I want to use something from the user age table, all I need to do is user.user_age_table dot whatever I want to do with it. But in this case, I use toList. toList is a method in entity framework, in system.link, right? And what this is saying that everything inside the user table, right? Everything at all that is inside the user table, convert it into a list and return it to user, then send it to the view, right? Let me move this away, right? So basically, that is just a simple way to access everything in the database and present it either to the user or wherever you want to present it. Although most times this would not really be used because what if you have 1 million records? You want to show 1 million records to your user. You probably want to paginate it and do some other stuff. But in this scenario, since we're not doing that much, I would just bring up everything to the user. Then in this part, what I want to do is I want to add to the user database, right? So what I want to do is await context dot user data table dot add async user, right? Now, if you notice this up here, remember when I told you guys that in the last class, when I said if you're using the database, the syntax will almost be the same, right? This is like our database. And then when you're adding to it, you just use the add async method. I told you that the method is almost the same, right? And then you pass it. And that is the same thing we're doing. I'm using await and async because I do not want this to block our process, right? So I don't know if you've heard of asynchronous programming, where a particular step in a function or code might block the old code from working, right? But so as to avoid it, you probably want to turn it to an asynchronous code and then allow other codes to wait for it to complete its function before they continue. And that is what I am doing here. I could as well just say add, and it will still work, but just to be safe, I want to use the asynchronous aspects of this method. And then that should do the same thing. So that means I can now remove this. And the next thing I need to do is await context your save changes async, right? So basically when I add this, it's going to be tracking it. Then I need to change this to task. That's why it's showing that error. And I'm bringing a using statement of system.threading.task. All right. So when I add this, it's going to add it, right? But it's just tracking it. It's not going to persist it in the database, right? It's only when you do save changes, that is when it will persist it in the database. So what that means is I could add more than 1, 2, 3 times before actually saving it to the database, right? So these save changes that I'm calling on context is what's now going to check everything is being tracked and then update the database. Then the next thing I'm going to do is redirect to action. So let's see all of this in Works. I'm going to run our code now. Let's just give it a second. Okay, let's check this out. I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to share my old screen now so that we can test this out. So I'll click on this, open it up somewhere. So now if I go to users, nothing would be in our users. As you can see, nothing is there. But if I add a user and say, just add this, location, Lagos, and add, our user is now added to the database. Now, if I check our database and reload this, let me reload this. I did stop. Our user has already been added here, right? If I add another user, I'm going to say John Go Abuja. Just give this a random number and jdo@gmail.com, right? I come here, it should be in the database. As you can see, the ID is automatically generated for us. We don't need to say ID of 1, ID of 2, ID of 3 when we are adding. Just add it and the ID will automatically be generated for us, right? And then if I close this, previously in our previous code, I close it and come back, the data will be lost. But now, because we're using an actual database, then the data would never be lost because it's stored in an actual database, right? If I shut down my system and come back, I'll still have this data in my system. So do you have any questions so far?
That's if you have an interview.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I don't really have a question. I'm just a bit overwhelmed, like so much information.
Well, you guys have been waiting for us. We are here. So let's see how much work you can put in to, take in all of this information, right? So, like I said, let me just put it this way.
Sorry, excuse me. Are there any resources that we can use, like maybe any write-ups or books on this?
Yeah, if you check the .NET documentation I shared earlier on, you get everything inside of here. I'm coming. Let's see. Entity framework. Yeah. If you check this, you'd see. Let me see. Query of data. Pagination. You want to read on pagination? There is stuff here for that. Overview. Let me see. Yeah, so you see context.blocks.toList. Then if you want to get a single one, content.blocks.single, then this. If you want to filter the where and stuff like that. And the documentation is just right here in this thing. So I could just share this with you. And then you see all of that. Then if you want to save data, let me see. Basic save, you have context.blocks.add and then save changes. If you want to update, if you want to delete, if you want to do some other stuff, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share this. No, let me share this with you. And then you can go through it. You could also check online on YouTube, Entity Framework, and setting up a database and using a database with .NET 6 or 5. And then you get all of those resources. But then I would also, upload the video. It's being recorded, so I also upload the video for you. Again and again and again. All right. But so like I said, most of these parts are just, the same thing over and over again. Like our app settings, the same over and over again. You just change the server and the URL. The program.cs, no, not startup.cs. This registration, the same over and over again. Sometimes it gets more options than what we have here, but the same default over and over again. A DB contest, this top, the same over and over again. This part, it changes based on the number of tables that you want to create. Sometimes you can get some configurations in here or below also, as much as you want. Then the rest are just basic stuff. Are we good? Any question? And I really don't want to, put much information of you. That's why I'm not going into updating and deleting today.
Hello, good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
Sorry, I would like you to recap over it. If it can be as snappy as possible, just to recap over it before the end of the class. And also, I would like to have the Git repository so as to have the source file, because I've been watching the video and coding alongside, and some of it I'm not getting it right. So
okay, I'll drop the source file later on today or tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so in a bit of recap, the first thing you need is your entity, right? This entity is what you need. It's what you're going to be using to create your table, right? This is the first thing you need. Next thing you need is to create your database context out of that entity, right? So this is the database context, and you create a DB set of that entity. You give it a name, which is what you're going to be using in your database table, as you can see here, right? Next thing is create your connection string. This is your connection string, right? That's your server name. Your server name is here. If I disconnect and reconnect, this is your server name, right? That's where you're getting your server name from. Then your database name, whatever name you want to give your database, that's that. Next thing, you go to startup.cs, you configure your DB contests by adding it to the pipeline, and then you configure it to use SQL Server. So you could also use any other database like Postgres, MySQL, MongoDB, whatever, right? So it depends on how you're doing it, right? But in this case, you can also use SQLite or whatever, but in this case, we're using SQL Server, right? So you need to do that. The connection string, so configuration of get connection string, right? The connection string is this. And the reason why it is default here is because it is what we called it here, default, right? This is the name of the connection string, and that's why we're passing default into it. So it's configurations. This configuration goes into app settings of JSON, and it gets the connection string called default, and then it passes it into this, right? Now, when we do that, the next thing we did was create our migrations file. We created our migrations file with the command. We created our migrations file with the commands .NET EF migrations add, and then the name of our migration. That's what we used to create our migrations file. Then after creating our migrations file, I created a folder called migrations, and then the files were added to it. Next thing we did was we updated our database using this command, .NET EF database updates, right? So this now created a database for us in the database here, and then created a table. This is the database, and created a table. No, not this one. Created a table. Yeah. So after we've done that, the next thing we did was we injected our application DB context, because like I said, our application DB context is like the eye of our database, right? It just connects our project to the DB, right? So the next thing we did was we now injected it into our controller. Yeah, so that we don't need to new it up every time that we need it in that page. All we need to do, since we've done the injection, all we need to do is use this field anywhere we want to use it, and that is here. as you can see, and yeah, right? So we don't need to now do AppDB contest equals new every time one use it, because we've injected it into the page. We've passed it as part of the page, right? And then to get everything in the body or in the database table, we call that database table and say to list. To add, we call the database table and say add, and then add it, and then we save changes. Are we good?
Yeah, I think you're good for now. You just have to look into the video again and see how it can split up. Then if there's any kind of blocker, I can give up to you.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's do that, right? When you're going through it, if you have any question, just reach out to me. And if I'm chance, I will look into it. Thank you very much, everyone. Do have a lovely evening. I'll drop the link. I'll upload the video and also drop this source file also so that you can go through it. All right. Then I would also give a little bit of time for us to go through it before I call for another class again. But we're already getting into the deeper part, right? We've not done one-to-one, one-to-many relationships. We've not done identity. We've not done some other stuff, right? So we need to do all of those stuff. But we're already coming to the end of the program, more or less, right? If we do all of this stuff, then we're good to go to our project, and then we'll say that we're done. It's been a long time coming. We've done quite a number of months, but we're making progress, and that's good too. All right, thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, sir.